What's going on, guys? Nathan here, back again with the green set review for the upcoming Magic the Gathering Final Fantasy set, which releases on June 13th, 2025. As usual, we're going to be talking about all of the best cards in the green color identity for the Commander format. Before we get into the video, just like to ask, if you enjoy this video, leave a like on it. I always appreciate it, and it really helps me out. Subscribe if you want to stay tuned for more Final Fantasy deck techs. And if you want to support me and my channel, you can check out my Patreon linked down below. As well, I have made video set reviews for white, blue, black, and red. So if you want to check those out, you can check out the description. They'll be linked down there. So without further ado, let's hop into our first green card from Final Fantasy, which is Clash of the Icons, a 1-mana sorcery. Choose one or more target creature control fights target creature and opponent controls. Remove a lore counter from target saga you control, or put a lore counter on target saga you control. So the going rate for your fight spell is about 1 mana in Commander. It's actually quote unquote below rate because we do get upgrades like Tail Swipe, which is an instant. So by exchanging the instant speed for Clash of the Icons, you get a little bit of the upside with being able to manipulate counters on your sagas, which is very good. Generally in saga type of decks like Terra and Tom Bombadil, we've mentioned a lot in previous set reviews. This particular set has given a lot of support to sagas, and so a Clash of the Icons is just a good vegetable card in these summon creature and saga type of decks. Then we move on to Tifa's Limit Break, which is a 1-mana instant, but we can choose one additional cost. For only a total of 1 mana, target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. For 3 mana, we get double target creature's power and toughness until end of turn. And for a total of 8 mana, we get triple target creature's power and toughness until end of turn, which is very cool considering that this is on an instant. So we have seen exponential growth before. Particularly, this has a better rate than Tifa's Limit Break, but it is at sorcery speed. So by upgrading to an instant speed, we are going to have to pay a little bit more for this sort of effect. We do have Choose Your Weapon, which does give us a mode of removal or doubling target creature's power and toughness until end of turn. So kind of comparable to Tifa's Limit Break here. But this is in the set review because I just thought it was kind of neat that we have our first card that says triple target creature's power and toughness until end of turn in green. So this could go into your big stompy decks or decks that want to swing out with one commander. So Galta, if you double its power, that is going to be a one-shot kill on your opponents, assuming that they don't block. And then Rafik of the Many, if you can give this guy flying or trample or any sort of thing like that, it will give itself double strike when it attacks alone. And so that's going to be a great sort of surprise spell in a Rafik of the Many deck. Then we move on to Bugenhagen Wise Elder. This is a 2-mana mana dork, which will also draw us cards at the beginning of our upkeep if we control a creature with power 7 or greater. So WotC has been leaning a little bit more into card draw stapled onto these mana rock or mana dork type of cards. So Herd Heirloom is a recent card that has been making its way into many green decks because it gives you either mana or card advantage. I really like running Llanowar Visionary in elf decks because it's going to represent both mana and card advantage stapled onto one card, even though it is somewhat inefficient. But Bugenhagen is particularly notable because it can repeatedly give you that card advantage and the mana advantage if you can meet that stipulation, which I think is really neat. And honestly, I think this is efficiently costed for what it does, but the risk here is that because it's on a creature body, you are at risk of being board wiped. But I think Bugenhagen is still just a great vegetable card and could possibly unseat a Herd Heirloom if you want more creature bodies in your deck. Although I anticipate most green decks, if you're running a Herd Heirloom, you're going to be running Bugenhagen right beside it. So in terms of the commanders that might want this, again, any commander that already has that 7 power that you will consistently see on the battlefield, Galta type of decks, Ireni of the Unwritten has 7 power. This is a human, of course, so it doesn't meet that, dragon synergy that Ireni is looking for, but it's going to give you both mana card advantage if your commander is 7 power or more. That will take us to Maester Seymour, 3 mana 1/3 at the beginning of combat on your turn, putting number 1/1 counters equal to Maester Seymour's power on another target creature you control. And for 5, we get a Monstrosity X, where X is the number of counters among creatures you control, which is absolutely ridiculous if you can also give this guy trample. So this looks a lot like Master Biomancer. In addition, Denry Klin, kind of a comparison here, but Denry Klin is a little bit different because we need to start stacking counters on it before we can start putting counters onto creatures with Denry Klin. Master Seymour, I think, is a little bit simplified, a little bit more efficient, and I think it's going to squeeze out cards like Master Biomancer or just be run right alongside it in plus and counter decks. So we see just a little bit of power creep happening here, and I think the elf creature type is very important on Maester Seymour as well, and will fit into a lot of elf tribal decks that care about 1/1 counters. So in our 1/1 counter decks, we have here, of course, Hamza, Guardian of Arashin, is a very popular counters commander. Sovereign Okonek Ahau is kind of an interesting counter commander as well that I was giving kind of a look. Got my brewing juices going here. Obviously, there's your Atraxa decks. Everybody knows about Atraxa, Praetor's Voice, but that's a little bit boring. So here we're recommending some different Selesnya counters commanders. Then we move on to Trommel, Seymour's Butler. Now, this is an interesting case where the Butler is more powerful than the, Master or whoever himself. This is a 3-mana 2/3. Again, it's an elf, very important. Each other non-token creature you control enters with an additional 1/1 counter on it. But what's more important is Trommel has pay 1, tap, proliferate X times, where X is the number of non-token creatures you control that entered this turn. So the going rate for the passive ability here is about 3 mana. We already have Good Fortune Unicorn or something like a Tribute to the World Tree. But what's important about Trommel is that activated ability, where I think proliferate X for 1 is going to be the floor case most of the time. Often you'll be able to proliferate twice, and if you're already in a +1 counters deck, you're going to be running effects like Hardened Scales, which are going to add another counter. So if you're able to proliferate 2 times consistently with Trommel, and we all know that counters decks are very creature heavy, then I think that this guy is going to be putting some serious power and toughness onto the board. And for 3 mana, this guy is an absolute powerhouse, which both enables your counter shenanigans and is a payoff for the counter shenanigans as well. I'm really high on Trommel, and again, goes into all of your +1 counter decks. Traxa, Praetor's Voice, Shalai, and Halar. And Shalai and Halar can actually be more of a removal spell with Trommel, being that he's going to consistently put 1/1 counters on your creatures. Just an absolute powerhouse in counters decks. Really love Trommel. Next up here, we have Kina Ku Gourmet, a 3-mana 2/3 coup. If 1 or more tokens will be created under your control, those tokens plus a 1/1 green frog creature token are created instead, and we can pay 2 and sack a frog to put a 1/1 counter on Kina. Now, you'll never be really activating that ability, but this is just a cute replacement or another addition to the repertoire of make tokens and then make that plus a thing instead. So Queen Alanal does this for soldiers. Chatterfang is one of the most popular for squirrels, and this does work with creating treasure tokens because notably the passive does not stipulate only creature tokens. So the thing is, this guy doesn't have a great home because there's not really decks that care specifically about the frog creature type. You could run this in a frog tribal type of deck, which would actually be really funny and ironic because you are running a Q that eats frogs in a frog deck. But there is like Clement the Worrywart, which I guess is sort of a frog tribal commander. Or if you're already just making a lot of tokens, if you are running like a lot of small, like single trigger token maker effects in something like a Queen Alanal, you could give Kina a look. It's a cute effect. I just don't know what deck it really belongs in, given the weird creature typing and the fact that it makes a frog, which is also another sort of weird creature type. So take that for what you will. Next up here, we have Traveling Chocobo, far and away the best green card from the entire set. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may play lands and cast bird spells from the top of your library, and if a land or bird you control entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. This is an egregious case of power creep because we already had this effect at 6 mana with Ancient Green Warden, and that has now been reduced to 3 mana with Traveling Chocobo. This is just like a clear, obvious case of WotC pushing a Traveling Chocobo, particularly I think into standard in order to perhaps make Bird Tribal work and to just sell more Final Fantasy packs. But what's interesting is that it cares about any lands or birds you control entering. So if you do have a bird that enters and triggers your Tribute to the World Tree to put 2/1/1 counters on it, for example, then that will trigger twice. And actually, that's an interesting case. I don't know how Tribute would work. For example, if you had a 1/1 enter and then you have the triggers go on the stack, the first one would obviously put the counters on it, but then the second one might have you draw a card. I'm not really sure how the ordering of that works. Somebody can correct me in the comments below. But Traveling Chocobo, such a powerhouse. It's sort of like the Sephiroth case where it's so powerful it really doesn't need much commentary because it's so good. If you're in a landfall deck or a bird deck, you simply play Traveling Chocobo and that's it. Then this is going to go into all of your typical landfall decks aside the Necrobloom, yada yada, boring landfall. Next up here we have Yuna's Decision. Decision, a 4-mana sorcery, choose one. Sacrifice a creature. If you do draw a card, then you may put a creature card or a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. I totally missed the "and" in that initial reading of the card. I thought you had to choose between the creature or the land. That's insane, ladies and gentlemen. This was already in one of my top cards from the green set. This just like propelled it way more, because if this is going to both draw you a card and ramp you and slam a creature from your hand onto the battlefield, that's insane. That's totally insane. And then to cap that off, that would be a great card all on its own. We get the option to return 1 or 2 target permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. Now, I was looking for comparables, specifically something that would be on a sorcery that we could actually activate right away for the first mode, and I came up with not great comparisons here. Lure of Prey is a really old card that nobody really plays. If an opponent casts a creature spell this turn, we can actually just put a green creature card from our hand into play at instant speed, which is kind of neat. So that's going to be a comparison to the first mode there. And then the second mode is actually a little bit underrated because we already do have Peerless Recycling, but for Peerless Recycling, we have to give an opponent a card. But I consider that a little upside because you can politic around giving the card away. So Yuna's Decision is going to be both mana and card advantage stapled onto one effect. You are almost always going to pick the first effect here. Now, if you think about the fact that this allows you to put a creature card from your hand into play, let's think of like a Worldspine Worm, for example. What you can kind of consider Yuna's Decision as is just a giant ritual, something akin to like a green mana geyser, to allow you to get enough mana to then slam that creature into play, minus the cast trigger, of course. So Yuna's Decision, if you consider the fact that the creature clause for free is going to represent a giant ritual effect, plus the fact that you then draw a card from that spell, plus you get to slam a land onto the battlefield, that's absolutely insane. That's absolutely insane, and it's just amazing. And this is, I mean, it also has pretty cool art. So just a solid card all around here with Yuna's Decision. In terms of decks this might go into, it could serve as a second copy of Kona Rescue Beastie. Kona can put just insane things into play, and it specifies just any permanent, not even just creatures. Also, I like this in Pantlaza, specifically looking for creatures that are big, you know, kind of clunky and overcosted, and dinosaurs are kind of that archetype. So Yuna's Decision can just slam a big beefy dinosaur, maybe a Jisath or something, into play for you. So absolutely spectacular card here with Yuna's Decision. Then we will move on to the Earth Crystal. For 4 mana, we get a legendary artifact. Green spells you cast cost 1 that's cast. If 1 or more 1/1 counters would be put on a creature control, twice that many 1/1 counters are put on that creature instead. So this is a branching evolution combined with an Emerald Medallion, which makes this card pretty good in terms of its efficiency. We also have Corpsejack Menace as another example here. So there's only a couple of effects in Commander that actually just double the number of 1/1 counters that are put onto creatures, which I think is a little bit overrated, because often in Commander you're going to be putting counters on things one at a time, and so Hardened Scales is more efficient and will accomplish basically the same thing, unless you're running like a bunch of counter effects, like an Ondoril Narsil Reforged puts 2 1/1 counters, or there's also I think like Railway Brawler, which basically doubles up a creature's power and toughness. Also really good in Yarok, by the way, because if you have 2 triggers from a Railway Brawler having a creature enter, then you actually quadruple the creature's power and toughness, which is very cool. But the Earth Crystal, anyway, let's get back to our card we're talking about here, is going to be just pretty efficient. I think that this is probably in the number 2 or number 3 slot from the crystals within the set. The 6 and activated ability is not amazing because you're only putting like 4 1/1 counters in total, and that for 6 mana is just bad. But I think that this is going to be just a great setup piece. Again, at 4 mana, it's a little bit awkward on the curve, which is kind of the rub against all of the crystals, but the fact that you can combine a branching evolution with an Emerald Medallion is going to be very powerful either way, and I think this is going to be just run in so many counters decks. Then we move on to Bartz and Boko. This is a 5 mana, but it has affinity for birds, so basically a 2 mana 4/3. When it enters, each other bird you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature an opponent controls. So this is going to go in your bird decks and nowhere or else it's just the most efficient bird removal spell that's on a bird creature body. Then we move on to Lifestream's Blessing, 6 mana for an instant, draw X cards, where X is the greatest power among creatures you controlled as you cast the spell, which is very important wording. If the spell was cast from exile, you gain twice X life, which can be a nice boon in the late game, and it's at instant speed as well. So this is just sort of like an extra copy of Rishkar's Expertise, but I like it because it is at instant speed, so you can do this in response to your creature being removed, which in big green stompy decks tends to happen a lot. And I also have Return of the Wild Speaker as an example here because that's going to draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control. But I believe because it is missing that as you cast a spell wording, if you were to have this on the stack and then somebody then swords your biggest creature, then I believe that Return of the Wild Speaker would move to the next highest power creature. Instead of Lifestream's Blessing, you do just constantly get that X locked in whenever it is cast. So an interesting little card here. I think this will be run in like most stompy decks. So Goreclaw decks, Galta decks, you know, the typical archetype of big green swinging creature decks. Then we move on to A Realm Reborn. 6 mana for an enchantment. Other permanents you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color. This is a really interesting effect, and there are not other effects other than perhaps Honor Worn Shaku that just allows all permanents you control to tap for 1 mana of any color. There's a lot of effects that allow your creatures to tap for 1 mana of any color, but not necessarily other permanents. So I think A Realm Reborn is only going to really go into your Enchantress decks because often what you have is a bunch of enchantments laying around doing nothing. And so here, A Realm Reborn is going to represent basically a ritual spell in an Enchantress deck so that you can cast your Crater Hoof and actually finish your opponents off. And moving on here, we have Jumbo Cactuar, 7 mana for a 1/7. Whenever this creature attacks, it gets plus 9,999 plus 0 until end of turn. There aren't any comparisons. It's just Jumbo Cactuar at the moment, ladies and gentlemen. This is just a big freaking boy. It's really flavorful too. I was looking at some of the Final Fantasy like battles with this guy, and it's absolutely hilarious how this guy can just kind of one-hit KO you. So Jumbo Cactuar is going to go in any deck that can reliably give it evasion or fling it. So Zayator is going to want this body the most because it can basically instant KO an opponent even if the Jumbo Cactuar does not connect. And then Ovia will give it trample and also allows you to cheat it into play as well. So Jumbo Cactuar, really interesting card. Personally, if I were got by this, I don't know if I would be salty or laughing because I mean it's a Jumbo Cactuar, but I don't know. Just a really interesting design here. And I think, honestly, this will probably represent a lot of one-hit KOs because it's pretty trivial to give creatures evasion in Commander for very little mana. So Jumbo Cactuar, look out for it. Next up here, we have Balam T. Rexasaur. This is just a shout out to the Pauper EDH format. This is going to be another example of power creeping out Colossal Dreadmaw. However, again, Balam T. Rexasaur will not win you the emotional game, whereas Colossal Dreadmaw will. So clear downgrade from Colossal Dreadmaw in that arena, but in terms of the actual mechanical arena, we already have been power crept this with Colossal Dreadmask, and Balam T. Rexasaur can allow us to search for forests, so I would actually probably run Balam over the Colossal Dreadmask either way. So anyway, that's a shout out to Pauper EDH, which will be put into Emoti decks, Goreclaw decks. Both of these are uncommon commanders that are relatively popular within PEDH. Then we move on to Ancient Adamantoise. For 8 mana, we get an 8/20 turtle with Vigilance Ward 3. Damage is removed from this creature during cleanup steps, and all damage it would deal to you and other permanents you control is dealt to this creature instead. Whenever this creature dies, exile it and create 10 tapped treasure tokens. A lot going on with this card. This is basically a pariah on a creature. Now, what's interesting is that if this creature dies, it is a trigger that goes onto the stack. So it doesn't say if it was exiled, create those 10 tapped treasure tokens. Instead, what you can do is you can, in response to that death trigger, cast something like a Malakir Rebirth to return the Ancient Adamantoise to the battlefield, and you still get those 10 tapped treasure tokens, which is really cool. So I think most decks are probably going to want to be cheating this out and then sacrificing it and then reanimating it with something like a Malakir Rebirth in order to get all of that value. Also, an interesting interaction which I learned about today from the YouTube channel, I believe it's called just This Is a Commander channel, was talking about how if you have a shifting woodland on the battlefield and it becomes a copy of the ancient adamantoise, and it actually takes damage while it is a creature, that damage will remain on the shifting woodland. Now, if you then go to your opponent's turn, if the shifting woodland remains a land for that player's turn, then it will actually have the damage be removed from the shifting woodland at that time. So then on your turn again, you can make it a copy of ancient adamantoise and it will still have that 20 toughness. On the other hand, if you have it, so let's say you it took damage on your turn and then you passed your opponent's turn, then if you have it become a creature again, then the game basically will not remove the damage from it because at the time of the cleanup step, it is still a creature. So what this means is that you can have it become a copy of your creature once, and then you want it to be removed. You want the damage to be removed during the cleanup step while the shifting woodland is not a creature. So just keep that in mind. But if you do need to activate the shifting woodland twice, then the damage will remain on it if you want it to become a creature again on your opponent's turn before the next cleanup step has passed. So I hope that made sense. It probably didn't, but if you're still curious about how that works, check out This Is a Commander Channel's video talking about it. And in terms of the decks that this will go in, instant windmill slam into toughness matters. My goodness, does Felithar the Steadfast want this? And my goodness, Pride of Hallclade, it's a turtle. We're finally building up Turtle Tribal, folks. Thank you, Wizards of the Coast, for adding more playable cards to Pride of Hallclade, because that is a cool ass commander. All right, and then that will take us to our honorable mentions. We have a few cards here for cards that were worth mentioning but just didn't quite make the cut into the main set. We have Zanarkand, Ancient Metropolis. For 6 mana, we can create a 1/1 call a hero creature token and put a 1 counter on it for each land you control, but have a land that enters tapped on the back side. In my opinion, this is the worst, possibly the worst or second worst of the adventure land cycle, because if you're paying 6 mana to create a generic 7/7 creature, then you simply are not really winning the game. I think that is just extremely inefficient to make a vanilla 7/7, and these types of creatures do not win you the game. Nobody, unless you're in a vanilla Creatures Matter, will win the game with a Quakestrider Ceratops. You really need to have any sort of evasion stapled to a creature, because your big beater is completely useless on the offensive, because if it swings in and is blocked, well, now you can't even block with it anymore. So it really needs some sort of keyword, vigilance, trample, flying, to make it worth it. And I would not personally run a tapped land, or rather a tapped land that doesn't color fix you in a land slot for this effect. And I don't think the sorcery is good enough to run it in a spell slot either. So Zanarkand, definitely an honorable mention, kind of a scuffed adventure land here. Then we move on to Sphere Grid. This one I was really kind of on the fence for including it in the main set review, but we'll read it here. 2 mana for an enchantment. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, put a 1/1 counter on that creature, and then a creature you control 1/1 counters on them have reach and trample. So doing sort of a Duskshell Crawler impression here. I think that Sphere Grid will put on obviously more counters than something like a Duskshell Crawler, and it is a little bit more sticky because it is an enchantment. But I will say the downside to Sphere Grid is that it isn't a creature itself. So with 1/1 counters, you obviously want to play a lot of creatures to start stacking counters on all of your creatures. So it depends on what you're really looking for within your deck. If you want a little bit more diversification to have a stickier enchantment that will put counters onto your creatures, great, then run Sphere Grid. But if you need to hit that critical mass of creatures in your deck, then run something like a Duskshell Crawler. Also, depending on the price of the card, I think Sphere Grid might be something around $7, $6 to $8, somewhere around there at the time of this recording. So if cost is a factor to you, then you can certainly replace this with a Duskshell Crawler as well. Then we will go to Tifa Lockhart, a 2 mana 1/2 with trample. Whenever land you control enters, double Tifa Lockhart's power until end of turn, which according to the professor's video is actually shaking up some formats, because because people are running this as an infect card, which is really interesting. I think what you want to be doing is basically doubling Tifa's power in some way, and then you also want to be running some ramp on the side with a plethora of fetch lands in order to maximize those landfall triggers. So as a commander, she's really interesting because you just need to get her to 21 power, which can be somewhat easy to do. You do need the stars to align because you need, like a nature's lore effect plus a fetch land, so that would get you to, 3 landfall triggers, and then assuming that you have some sort of buffing ability, if you could give it like a +4/+4, maybe with like a titanic growth, that would get you to 5, and then you would double, so that would go 5, 10, 20. So you really only need like probably just 2 doubling effects there, although that wouldn't get you to the magical 21 number. But point being is that Tifa Lockhart is an interesting commander, but kind of scuffed in the 99 because again, it's just a single trample body, and she dies to removal just like any other creature. So I don't know that it's going to be like a real all-star unless you were heavily built around Tifa Lockhart. Then we move to Town Greeter, which is a 2-mana 1/1 human citizen. When this creature enters mill 4, you may put a land card from among them into your hand, and then who cares about the town thing. The point of Town Greeter is that it is the second best, I'll call it a mulch creature effect that we've seen. Specifically, Satyr Wayfinder is still the best because you get to, reveal the top and then choose one, and then those go to the graveyard. Town Greeter is very similar. These other effects like Blanchwood Prowler only mill 3. So specifically, I have like a Cathrall deck, I think, that I'll be upgrading Blanchwood Prowler for Town Greeter because you get to mill an extra card, which is why this is notable. And then we'll move to Saz Katsroy. 4 mana for a 3/3 human pilot. When it enters, you may search your library for a bird or a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle, and whenever Saz Katsroy attacks, put a 1/1 counter on target creature, then double the number of 1/1 counters on that creature. So Saz is basically just an inefficient bird tutor that you're always going to be tutoring up your traveling chocobo. We all know how this is going to work. This guy is going to just be tutoring chocobos left and right. I don't think most people are going to play this for the basic land tutor because that's just below rate, but this will go into your bird decks to search up traveling chocobo and all of the best birds. And then we moved on to Rydia's Return. This is a bit of a scuffed sorcery at 5 mana. It's 5 mana for a choose one creature control, get +3/+3 until end of turn, or return up to 2 target permanent cards from graveyard to your hand. So this is not as good as Return of the Wildspeaker, but I mention it because it is another effect where you have the choice of an overrun or card advantage stapled onto one card. And while it isn't at instant speed like Return of the Wildspeaker, just that pairing of options on a card makes this almost never dead in your hand. And so I wanted to mention it for those of you who are looking for another similar copy of Return of the Wildspeaker. Then we move on to our last honorable mention, Summon Titan, 5 mana 7/7 to reach trample. Chapter 1, mill 5. Chapter 2, reanimate all of your lands to the battlefield tapped. And then Chapter 3, another target creature you control against trample gets +++X, where X is the number of lands you control. And then Summon Titan will die after that resolves. Now, this is going to be technically 1 mana less than a Lomra. However, Lomra gets the ETB, reanimate all your lands anyway, and it does mill 4 as well. So I consider Summon Titan actually a downgrade from Lomra, but because it is similar to Lomra, and we all know that Lomra is an absolute powerhouse in Commander, I would still run Summon Titan side by side Lomra within any deck that wants to reanimate a bunch of lands out of the graveyard, like Necrobloom or something like that. And it is a 7/7 reach trample body that, while you only get it for really 2 turns in total, this guy is a big body that will deter attackers. So interesting card here with Summon Titan. Definitely a powerhouse more in like standard or any sort of 1v1 format. In Commander, it's okay. We really care about Chapter 2, but that's going to be a pretty big boy there for 5 mana. And then we'll move to our top 3 green cards from the Final Fantasy set. And if we could get a drum roll, please, we have Traveling Chocobo, Trommel Seymour's Butler, and Yuna's Decision. Traveling Chocobo is going to be an insta-windmill slam into all landfall decks until the end of time, all bird decks until the end of time. Just a super pushed, power-crept bird, the best bird ever printed, in fact, in the entire format, and in pretty much all formats, other than maybe Birds of Paradise, if you're, in like really, really old formats. And then we have Trommel Seymour's Butler, which is going to be both an enabler and a payoff for +1 counters decks. I feel like every single set we get, we have to make some really hard cut decisions in +1 counters because that archetype has gotten so much support just over the decades. So I think Trommel is actually good enough to break into most +1 counter decks, which is a very high bar to meet because it's going to be proliferating a bunch of times and it's going to be putting counters on things. Again, just combining the setup and payoff onto one card while also being an elf creature type, which is incredible. And then we have Yuna's Decision, which is going to act both as a massive ritual in effect by allowing you to slam a creature onto the battlefield, and you get to ramp yourself. Then you get to draw a card, and if you care about putting things in the graveyard, if you're in Golgari or something like that, you can sacrifice a creature to then reanimate later. My goodness, is the Continue the Pilgrimage portion of this card doing so much work. And as a backup, let's say you didn't want any of that, you can still do a functional tutor to get back 2 permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. My goodness, mana advantage and card advantage stapled onto one effect. I think this is yet another example. We talked about this in some of the other set reviews, but like Wizards of the Coast, they're not necessarily reducing the cost of certain effects, although Traveling Chocobo is an exception. My goodness, 6 mana for Ancient Greenwarden to 3? Come on, Watsy. Anyway, what they're doing is they're making effects more dense onto one card. You're getting more bang for your buck in any given slot nowadays, and I think Yuna's Decision is like a clear example of that. Just more and more words being included on these cards nowadays. So Yuna's Decision could go into pretty much any deck that wants to have creatures on board and big creatures in their hand. So that is going to wrap up my green set review for the Final Fantasy Magic the Gathering set. If you guys enjoyed this video, leave a like on it. Subscribe if you want to see more. I have a few deck techs that I plan that are currently in the works for a Final Fantasy. Choco Seeker of Paradise, might do Celis Rune Knight, might do Clive, the mono red rummaging guy, and we might do Kefka. All of these I'm sort of ideating around at the moment, but if you're interested in any of those, you can definitely stay tuned and subscribe to see more deck techs like that in the future. And if you want to see any of my other set reviews, those will be on screen now.